Weaving the Future, a sermon about spiders weaving in hope of the new year. Because this is my first sermon here of the new year. But really sort of every day is a new year. Because if we're talking about a cycle, if we're talking about a wheel, if we're talking about a spiral, if we're talking about a web, every moment is that opportunity to look back, to see and to weave forward. One of those pictures you saw earlier was inspired me with these meditation words. Against the bright blue, the jewel spider wove her new abode, and the slow work of cleanup started. Weaving our homes together with stories of survival and loss, we are called to toss out what is of no longer use, and repair, and rebuild, and restore. But more, we are called to respect our relationship with the earth, with each other, and you, and act accordingly. We are the storytelling animal. You've heard me say that 12 times. You'll hear me say it 12 more. We are the storytelling animal. We are a poetry-spewing species. Which is not to say that we're the only animals with narrative or poetry, but it's to highlight how we organize our worlds. It would be more accurate to say we're the metaphoric animal, but that doesn't sound quite as romantic, right? We're also the sentimental animal, and boy, we're not that. We're pragmatic. We're people of reasoned faith. We're not sentimentalists, but we are. Being a storytelling animal helps me wrap around my pragmatic critic of weaving webs of words. It helps me become stepping my foot onto those pathways of possibilities. We are metaphor in action. A dear friend of mine, theologian Sheila Hardy, who some of you may remember, she passed a couple of years ago. She used to say she wanted to make bumper stickers that said, "In metaphor we trust." I promised her I would. This year, my New Year's resolution is to make them. I also want to have one that says, "Simile, God loves you." Just so those people can understand. The stories we tell, they're heard in our hearts. They become our behavior and they shape our world. But not just the stories that we heard that are heard in our hearts. It's how they're told to us and how we ask the questions about them. It's how we wonder about those stories. And we unfortunately have been taken out of that wonder. We've been taken out of that sitting in the possibility of the story into having other people tell us what the story means or what it was. When we were first looking at our world to connect with that which is greater than ourselves, we looked at the natural world. We looked at elements of wind and water and fire and air. And then we started looking at the animal species. And first, in most of Africa, we started looking at the bee, and the queen bee became one of the images we had for a divine mother. And in the northern regions, the spider, once we became agrarian, started growing things and started weaving, the spider became one of the images that we had for a divine being. The horned goddess, as I spoke to you last, that was the reindeer because she was so agile and she could help protect her herd during the whole winter. We started looking for metaphor. What was the story that we were seeing out there that we could take and apply to ourselves? What is the story of the itsy bitsy spider? Now, some will tell you that it's a story that is about subjugation. Some will tell you it's a story about the futility of trying. It is not. That's the same story, but it's interpreted in different ways. They will tell you it's about the proletariat being the spider and trying to climb up, and the rain being the great big bad washing you down every single time. And they miss the point, because the point is that the spider tries again and again and again and survives, is not washed away. That is the key element. So when you have other people interpret your stories, grab a hold of what they might mean. What are they? There's a new book. It's called In I Is an Other, The Secret Life of Metaphor and How It Shapes the Way We See. And I love this book. It's like all of my stuff when I was a teenager and younger and I was wrapping my head around story. It's like it's now a legitimate field of scientific study. Yes! Anyway, James Gary makes the case far more thoroughly than I have time for here. But I love this quote. Once you twig metaphor's modus operandi, you'll find its fingerprints on absolutely everything. Kenneth Holyoake, a doctor of psychology as well as a poet, I love that, doctor of psychology as well as a poet, studies analogy and how it's used in learning new concepts. In his book, The Spider's Thread, Metaphor in Mind, Brain, and Poetry, he uses this phrase, tossed out a filament. Toss out a filament in hopes of making a connection between arts and sciences. He tosses out a filament in making a connection between poetry and psychology. Quote, this filament is made of metaphor, a mysterious human capacity that links thought and emotion with language. It is that space that I believe we find the sacred. That space that has no words, we have to use metaphor. That space where we have no literal language that can express our experiences or even give us the map or the direction we need to travel in. Only metaphor will do. The sun is like a golden orb. The golden spider weaves the thread, which is like this story which connects us all together. I can't have any other words but metaphor. His book is dedicated to the specific study of metaphor and poetry. For me, if storytelling contains no poetry to heighten its message of prose, it's pretty shabby storytelling. It becomes, even if it's fiction, it becomes what we call mere narrative. And you hear that word a lot now. Well, their narrative is, this narrative is, the narrative that is being put out by these people are. What they're doing is they're giving another word for story, because story now means lie. So now they're using the word narrative. It's all the same. This is the metaphor that we are giving you to make sense of what we're doing in this world. Listen to that. Listen to it. In this coming year, I urge you to set aside your judgments and pursue the call of your muses. I am a prolific author of some pretty mediocre poetry. I write it every single night. So occasionally some of it's good, most of it is not. That is actually okay. Because if I don't keep spinning my web, I'm never going to catch the fly. I'm never going to have that sustaining moment where it actually is a piece of not bad words put together in a string that might actually touch somebody else. You might read that on a printed page, you might hear it from my mouth, it goes, that piece. But we have to keep going. So whatever your gifts are, the world needs them, and the world needs them now. Because essentially all is perhaps metaphor. In the end, I now spend time listening to ethers and grabbing at threads woven in image and song, brought to me by dogs carrying sticks and spiders dangling over my head as I meditate, which is where that first poem that I read came from. Some are well-worn stories of antiquity, some are called sacred texts, and those are sacred texts, not the sacred texts. And some are simply new mythologies for the present moment. This morning of this new decade, I want to weave a little bit of all three of these together. When we became agrarian, as I mentioned earlier, we envisioned the goddess as spinners and weavers. We took many lessons from the spider clans. The Sumerian goddess of weaving, Utu, arose around 3000 BCE, with the goddess and the word for spider being one in the same. So you didn't have two words, you had one word, and it meant the same thing. Every culture around the globe has ancient sacred spider stories. In some there are tricksters, in some there are warriors, but the earliest, they were all spinners and weavers. They were the fates. In the turning of the wheel that we talk about, it's the turning of the distaff. When you start turning filament into thread on a spinning wheel, when you start turning that into yarn so that you can weave with it. When we talk about the web, when we talk about the spinning wheel of the year, when we talk about putting a wreath on a door, all of those are symbols that go back to an agrarian that was starting to weave. Weaving became important. We were no longer simply wearing animal skins. All spiders spin silk. All spiders spin silk. All people have story. No matter, some spin webs, some just weave their egg sacs. Some do anchor lines to find their way home. Each one of you has a gift. You may weave a story, you may weave a web, You may live an anchor line to help lead other people back home. How many of you are familiar with the story of Arachne? Yeah, I've got one. Maybe I've got sort of a half, kind of. Part of what I've been doing is I've been taking stories, sitting in meditation with them, and listening to what that story needs to be told today. Where did that story come from, and what does it have to give to us? So this version I'm going to tell you is going to be a little bit different, perhaps, than the one that you've already heard before. It's no less factual. Don't confuse facts and truth. Truth you'll find in your heart. It'll resonate deep down within. Facts are going to be from one side of this elephant, I find a tree trunk. On the other side, I find a wall. It was like a snake. It was like a brush. All of those are facts, none of them containing the truth. The truth lives in your heart and your gut, and you put it together with your mind, and you're going to spew it out in metaphor. And hopefully it's going to land on somebody else who goes, yes, I hear that truth. I hear that truth. I see you. I see you. I hear your story. I see you. I see you. I hear your story. I hear your story. I honor that. So, this moment called for this story, I thought, perhaps. Many of you remember Athena? Most of you should remember Athena. Those that don't know Arachne, remember Athena. Okay, Athena is the goddess of truth and wisdom. She's that gal that sprang full-blown in full battle garb from her father's head, split wide open. She's got the gold thing on. She's got the shield. She's got the sword. Yeah. And I really sort of hesitate to use the word born. Because if you don't know how she came, Zeus swallowed Athena's mother, Metis. And why did he do this? Because he discovered she was pregnant. And he was scared that she was going to deliver the son that was going to overthrow him like he did to his father. I guess being immortal, you've got those problems of succession. So, mortal kings used to want sons only to inherit their kingdom, but, perhaps if you are the king of Olympus, you kind of need to swallow your wife. Well, he ate his pregnant wife, which I think resulted in a very bad headache. At least that's what the stories tell us. He had a very, very bad headache, and I'm not making that part up. It's true. Very, very bad headache. And so he went to his grandmother, because what are you going to do when you get a really bad headache? You go to someone who knows about things like that, and grandmothers have had plenty of headaches in their lives, right? Some of you are probably grandmothers. So they go, and so he goes, and being a good mother that she was, Gaia took an axe to his forehead. And with one swift chop, the forehead split open, and Athena burst out. And the tales tell us that instantly she became Daddy's perfect girl. Smart, ready, pretty, of course, battle ready, the best weaver in the land. Yes, that's one of the attributes you don't hear so much about her, the best weaver in the land. Totally dedicated to her job. The only one Zeus in any of the stories has ever trusted with his lightning bolts is Athena. She is never in any story that we have, been given any children. She is the virgin warrior. She is the virgin warrior. Later on, she was given wisdom and truth, but in this story, she doesn't have them quite yet. Now, at this time, Greece was becoming stronger and stronger and conquering more and more of its neighbors, and because there was so much trade going on in the Mediterranean at that time, they all paid import fees. And Greece decided that rather than pay the import fee, they were just going to conquer. That way they didn't have to pay the import fees because suddenly that was now part of their kingdom or their emperordom, their empire. So when you can take the stuff, so in typical tradition, they took the goods and left their gods behind. Sound familiar? Yeah, it should. The Greek Empire became the Roman Empire became the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire became, and then there was the Reformation, and we're still in some way conquering and leaving our gods behind. Sometimes these are gods of money, sometimes they're gods of text, and I'm digressing. I'll get back to the story. So there's an Arachne. Arachne is a wonderful young mortal woman living in the kingdom of Lydia, which is a real place in the Mediterranean. You can go and you can visit there. It's now part of Turkey. Its main claim to fame, and it was a major claim to fame at the time, was its finely woven fabrics and tapestries. It was expert, and that they prided themselves in it. Arachne was an expert weaver. She grew up in the trade. She had all the natural gifts, and she loved it. By every account, she loved it. She loved it. But the Greeks had already taken over, and it wasn't pretty at first. Oh, I should mention this because this part is important. The only way we know the story of Arachne is from 3 men. Homer, Pliny the Elder, and somebody else. Virgil, of course. Ovid, Pliny the Elder, and Virgil. Homer didn't get into there. So, that's how we know this story. This story has been given to us only by these 3 guys. 3 guys who, by the way, were Greek. Yes, they were poets, but they were Greek. Anyway, when any conquering happens, it's not very pretty at first, and it wasn't pretty then, it's not pretty now. I should mention to you that the national symbol of Lydia was the spider. It was on all their battle shields that we found now. It was on every single bit. This is actually fairly recent. And so the Greeks won, they erected their temples, and they set up shop. Boom. And soon they began to admire Arachne and praise her. Like, wow, this girl's an amazing weaver. This is amazing. Wow, you must have done lots and lots of burnt offerings to Athena. And she was like, huh? And so they were like, wow, I mean, how did she grace you with such gifts? You're not even Greek. Wow. She's like, huh? And they're like, you must be so grateful to Athena for your weaving skill. And she, being a local teenager, simply said, no, Athena didn't give me this skill. It's mine. The skill is mine. And their response was, of course, well, silly girl, all gifts of weaving come from Athena. And she said, no, they don't. I worked really hard for this. And they went, huh? I practiced really hard. And by the way, who is this Athena anyway? What? Yeah, who is she? Athena, of course, upon hearing this in the stories, is filled with jealousy and rage because patriarchy. Decides to come down and see for herself. She dresses herself as an old hag. She visits this young, boastful, bratty girl to teach her a lesson because, after all, how disrespectful was that? All gifts of weaving come from Athena. Everybody knows that. Except, of course, Athena had never met this young girl before. So she visits this boastful, bratty girl to teach her a lesson. You know, the one that is, you are not a goddess version? You are not a goddess. Don't be a goddess. And the respect authority and the know your place, those lessons, yeah. Anyway, so this hag goes to her and says, so you think you're as good a weaver as Athena? And she goes, maybe, yeah. Yeah, I think probably. So, are you challenging her? She goes, well, maybe, sure. I'm up for a good contest. Yeah. I bet I could beat her in a challenge. Yeah, you think I think I could. And just then, the hag throws off her cloak and says, challenge accepted. And there's Athena, full battle garb, gold, spear, whole 9 yards. Puts it down, picks up a distaff, and says, okay. And soon looms are set up. Crowd had formed, of course. The weaving started. And Athena sat down. And she started weaving the story of how she defeated Neptune and brought fresh water to the land, which is a good story and a wonderful story and a true story. She was starting to get wise then, realizing that people needed water. It was exquisite. Zeus was rendered in all of his glory, Hera beside him smiling, all the Olympians beaming gloriously out of all the threads that she was weaving there. And when she was done, Athena thumped her shuttle to the ground, boom, and an olive tree springs right up. And then it blooms. And then suddenly it goes into full fruit. And everybody's picking ripe olives. Oh, Athena, oh, you are masterful. Meanwhile, Arachne wove the story of pillages. She wove the rapes. She wove the murders committed by the glorious Desidens of Mount Olympus. Arachne wove truth to power. Athena glanced over and flew into an embarrassed and jealous rage, ripping Arachne's tapestry to shreds with her father's lightning bolts, destroying her surroundings, burning the olive tree, decimating the town. When Arachne saw what she had caused to her native lands by her ignorant hubris, She took her spindle and, unwinding the remaining thread, wrapped it around her throat, and she throws her spindle over the closest beam and hangs herself. Now, in the old version, Arachne is punished for her hubris by being turned into a lowly spider after she is cut down from her suicide. And spiders were vilified. I did mention that they were sacred to the people of Lydia, right? Athena sits in the middle of a destruction and looks around. Her eyes clear, her head clears. She sees Arachne dead. She sees a scrap of the tapestry that Arachne had woven, and she looks at it. And she realizes that it's every bit as good as hers. And she looks down at Arachne and she says, "Oh, daughter, my daughter." I mean, who knows how daughters are made, especially if you were born from a forehead. She grabs her up into her arms. She looks at the content and she realizes every single bit of it was true. Every thread. Every thread. My girl, you shall become a true spider, and you shall have hundreds and hundreds of children, beautiful, glorious children, protecting us always, spiders reminding us of the truth, which is why they say today, always, you are never more than 30 feet away from a spider. Remember their lessons, what they give up for us, what they teach us, how they protect us. The deeper truth, and the reason I tell this story, is I believe it is critically important in this new year to look at the stories we have grown up with and delve into them with clearer eyes without our personal egos. We're so quick to defend. Well, I never owned a slave. We're so quick to defend and not listen to the stories. We're ready to identify with the underdogs of history, always, even if we're not really underdogs. We don't know how to see ourselves as the truly powerful people we are. The truth is our world is hurting and we all matter. Each and every one of us, and I know with every fiber of my being that we are all essential to the web of life. So let us stop seeing our stories as a single thread, but one that can be cut short by the Greek fates, but as a tapestry woven by the stories of many, many beings. The stories of our lives collectively and individually is one of rescue and renewal, honoring the past by removing the sharp edges of our egos and by mending the rents in our fabric of community. We forget the essential nature of being happy for our growth, sustainability, and freedom. And yes, I did just say happy, because that's a key element that we forget. When you are creating, when you are being in this world with your gifts, you find happy. There's a happiness there that underlies essential being that we forget. True happiness is not a whim of emotion, but a state of being when we live in compassion and justice and equity for all. Let us weave our future responsibly together. Our whole world depends on it. Tolstoy wrote this quote, and I like it a lot. The means to gain happiness is to throw out from oneself like a spider in all directions an adhesive web of love, and to catch all that comes. And so it is. Thank you.